Hello and welcome to another episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. So today I have a conversation with somebody who was recommended to me by Kai Whiting. So Kai, in his infinite wisdom, knowing exactly the kind of people who I should be speaking to, he often gives me great recommendations. And he said, "Listen, I've been talking with this wonderful person, Irene Regini from Satura Lanx. Now, Irene teaches Latin, and I don't know if Kai knew that Latin was a language that I would be very interested in taking on, but I think this was just enough push for me to finally get my arse in line, you might say, and to start learning this language, because Irene is a wonderful teacher, and we had a great conversation today about Seneca's 77th letter. And we don't read the whole letter, but we do, we have a really fascinating conversation around, I guess, the style that Seneca uses. I get Irene to read some of the letter in Latin. We discuss some of the passages and kind of what they mean, and basically just go through and have a chat about Seneca and his writings. And we also dive a little bit into Latin at the start and her journey through Latin, how she came to be so fascinated with the language, and how she is now teaching it on such a high level. And I'm glad to say that I'm now in her course, slowly chipping away, and I'm very excited to be there. So I'll give you a little bit of information about Irene, and then we'll dive into the interview. So, Irene Regini teaches Greek and Latin, and she's constantly trying to get better at both, which is why she's founded Satura Lanx. And there she shares short Latin lessons and courses. And she also has her own podcast on Easy Latin. And with all of this, she hopes that they will be useful to those who are just beginning to learn Latin, or for those who already know the language but want to get to speak Latin. She's created a special audiobook where she reads the entire letter, number 77, in Latin, which you can find via the link in the show notes below. So there are a whole bunch of links there, including to her website, Satura Lanx, where she teaches Latin. And as I said, I'm going to be jumping on there and chipping away at this language, especially now that I'm doing this series on Seneca's writings. I just think it would be wonderful to have a bit of a closer relationship to his writings by understanding at least some of the dialect that he was writing in. And as you'll hear in this episode, when Seneca's letters are read out in their native tongue of Latin, man, they just sound absolutely stunning. There's something very cool about that. So awesome. Well, as I said, there is a link in the show notes to where you can hear the entire letter read out in Latin, which is really fascinating. But without any further ado, I present to you this wonderful conversation with Irene Regini. Well, Irene, I'm really glad to have you here today, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. And so, firstly, welcome to the Practical Stoic, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you for your invitation, Simon. It was by chance, but I'm really happy to be here. And salvete omnes.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so we were introduced by Kai Whiting, who must have had a sixth sense about me, because, for me, there are two languages that if I'm going to learn a language, it's going to be these two. It's going to be either German or it's going to be Latin. And so he kind of reached out and said, "Hey, I want you to talk to Irene. She's got this channel on YouTube, Satura Lanx. And speaking, teaching, conversing in Latin, absolutely amazing. And so I guess I just want to throw it over to you. Tell me and whoever is listening a bit more about what you do with the channel, and how you got into it."
Yes. So first, maybe just I will talk briefly about my own background. So I first learned Latin in high school. In Italy, I'm Italian, by the way, and in Italy it's quite common to study Latin at the high school, and I attended the Liceo Classico, so classical high school, where the focus is, of course, on Latin and Greek. And I happened to have a wonderful teacher who's using this not so widespread method at the time. And so we were using the book Famiglia Romana, Lingua Latina per sé illustrata, and I'm sure that someone uses it because it's quite widespread now. But at the time in Italy, my teacher was just the only one in my school, and perhaps the only one among the few ones in Italy. And so from the beginning, I had this idea that Latin is not a dead language, but it's living, and that in order to learn it effectively, we have to speak in Latin. So we wouldn't speak in Latin actually in the classroom. She used like a mixed method. So we used to say some words in Latin, but not converse. But this was enough for me to sprinkle this passion for Latin. And so I kept attending circoli latini, which are circles where people meet to speak Latin, and I attended summer courses. And this way I was able to start speaking. It has been a very long process, but yes, like in any language, first come the passive comprehension and then the active skills in the language. So then I went on to study classics at the university, of course, in Pisa. And then I passed the exams to become a teacher. But then first, I'd always knew I would have been a teacher, and I loved teaching Latin in particular, but also teaching itself. But I was quite deceived from my experience at the university and also at this, let's say, university for future teachers, because they were really tied to tradition, and so teaching Latin traditionally, and one would have to really combat to speak Latin in the classroom, and it wasn't always possible. So
was it more geared
decided,
towards like translations and stuff like that, not
yes,
necessarily the
grammar
speaking
and
component?
translation. There are teachers who also use that book, Famiglia Romana, but usually you have to like cope with your colleagues who maybe have different ideas with your students, with their families. So it's not easy. And I didn't want to embark on such a difficult thing. So I decided to start teaching Latin online, where I can do it however I want. And so that's where I decided to open a channel on YouTube. First, it was like I was very shy. I'm shy, and so I didn't want to publish my videos on YouTube. So I would put them on YouTube and send them into the newsletter for the few subscribers I had. But then everyone kept telling me, why don't you make them public? And so I tried. And actually, my channel is quite successful, even because we are not so many now who speak Latin online. So there is not so much competition.
Yeah. I noticed that it's just you're one of the few people out there, especially even having the conversations in Latin. Like I was just saying before we talked, before we started this interview, I was amazed to hear you having a full spoken conversation with another person in Latin. And I think one of the comments was it's as if we've entered a realm where the Roman society kept on going and flourished, and it's so interesting to see that. Now I'm interested in the early education that you had, because firstly, even the thought of that we would have studied the classics in Australia. I mean, I didn't study the classics when I was in my younger education, let alone learning a classical language. What was what is the reasoning why they got you to learn something like Latin? Was it to bring you back to the traditions of the past and to let you? What did that give you as a young student? What's the idea behind that?
Let's say that I decided to learn Latin almost by chance. I'd always loved Italian, so my language and languages in general, and I think that among everything, I am particularly gifted in languages and not so much in math or the other subjects. So I really wanted to go deeper, and I had this idea from what I've listened to other people saying, that Latin would allow me to dive deeper into Italian, and that was it. So I decided that I would go to Liceo Classico, and I didn't know that I would have that teacher using that particular method, but it has been a wonderful surprise, and I don't know if I would have fallen in love with Latin using another method, because I didn't only fall in love with Latin itself, but in the way it was taught. And I think all the good teachers I know who teach Latin like in an active way, like a living language, whether it is with Famiglia Romana or other approaches, they are all passionate about the teaching itself, because these methods require the teacher to study and learn new methods of teaching, learn getting better himself at the language. That's not easy, particularly in Latin, where it is quite difficult to find other people to interact with, although it's possible now.
Yeah. Well, it's not surprising to me that your channel is doing well, because I mean, I can tell by the way that you're talking about the teachers who you admired, that you always admired teachers who are very passionate about the language and very passionate about speaking it and really embodying the language, right? And I feel like you give off that exact vibe. You're very excited about Latin, and that's great to see. And I wonder, do you have any sense of, so your audience, the people who are learning from you, what are they learning Latin for? Are they learning it to translate texts? Are they mostly professionals, academics? Are they just people who want to learn the language? What are you finding?
There is really a variety because I receive many emails, so I read the stories of different people around the world, and I love reading their stories. And yes, so I would say that many of them are there for passion. They always wanted to read original works in Latin, maybe someone because they are Catholic and so they want to read the Bible, some others because they are interested in philosophy or science, so or in literature, of course. So everyone has his reason, but I think that the main goal for many of them is being able to read fluently in Latin, which is very difficult if you approach Latin with grammar translation methods. It takes really a long time. Many of them, which is amazing, are there mainly for the community, because now, also thanks to the online world, there is actually a living community of Latin speakers. And so many of them just find it interesting, and I would say that these are the kind of people who would like to learn also Esperanto and all these kind of different strange languages, and so they're there because it gives them a sense of being part of something strange, and it's an elite thing, but in the good sense, which means that you feel like you are among the few crazy people who are speaking Latin, and that's fun, of course.
It must be so cool. It just, and I'm so glad that there are people out there who are kind of rekindling this fascination with the past, you know, and bringing it into the future as well. And I mean, especially with something like Latin. And I know we're supposed to be diving into a text from Seneca, but I'm going to keep on asking questions about about Latin because this is fascinating. How did the language develop? Where did it come from? Where were its roots spread out? And then how did it kind of turn into the language that we now know?
Okay, so the mother, let's say, of Latin is the Proto-Indo-European language. I don't know much about it because one needs to be a linguist to study it, and still linguists, of course, cannot reconstruct the whole language, but they can get an idea mainly by comparing the child languages, which are Latin, but also Greek and other languages. So that's the first route we can get to. And yes, that's it. So the evolution and the fact that the language was spoken brought to a differentiation among Greek, Latin, and all the other languages. And then Latin has undergone its own evolution. So we talk about classical Latin, but first there was Proto-Latin, let's say, and then there has been medieval Latin, and first the Latin of the first centuries after Christ. So that's the same language, but it has evolved. And sometimes I see that people tend to have the idea that classical Latin is different, is rather another language than medieval or Renaissance Latin, but in fact it is the same language. It has just evolved in time, just like Italian and English do.
Yeah, okay. So there's just words that, like we might say today, I'm trying to think of like colloquialisms that we have today that we would never have used. For example, woke.
Yes.
You might never have used that word, 30 years ago. Like it just evolves over time. And so, yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm fascinated by, who do you think are the top Latin authors who, if somebody is aspiring, apart from Seneca, of course, if somebody's aspiring to learn Latin, who are the heroes of the Latin language that you really enjoy reading?
Well, Cicero is considered like the father of the classical Latin language. Personally, I like Ovid, who is a poet. And mainly I get to like Roman writers because of their style and the content. And Ovid talks about mythology and tells stories, basically Greek and Roman stories, and does it in a way that I find very artistic and wonderful. So that's the reason why I like it. And then Seneca, of course, is my favorite proser. Then there is Livy, who's not as an artist as Seneca and Ovid, let's say, but he's interesting for the content. So he wrote like an encyclopedia of the world, and it's really fun and interesting to read, because sometimes we read the things that seem absurd and bizarre to us, but it's fun, and we really get the chance to see how Romans would see the world at the time, and how they used to have an infinite knowledge. Pliny was a writer, basically, but he was also a scientist, a doctor, let's say. He was really everything.
That fascinates me about the kind of classical education that, for somebody like Seneca, for example. I'm really glad that you called him an artist, because I think that a lot of the time we think of him as a philosopher, but he was so creative, and he wrote poems, and the way that he wrote philosophy was just beautiful. And I think that he was an artist first. He had that creative spark, right?
Yes, and he was really ahead of time. He was really modern. If you read the Seneca now in translation, you could be thinking that it is a modern author, and that was really atypical at the time. He really invented his own way to treat philosophy with these short sentences, very abstract words, which is really atypical in Latin, because Latin is a really concrete language. But Seneca, of course, because he had to talk about philosophy, so this requires itself talking about abstract things, but he managed to do this in a very concise and short and modern way, I think.
Yeah, and is that one of the reasons why he's kind of one of your favorite Latin authors? Like, why are you interested in Seneca? I know you're doing a series on your YouTube channel where you're reading Seneca's letters, and why Seneca? What drew you to his writings?
Okay, I have, let's say, a sentimental reason, because it is one of the first authors I read in Latin when I was at the high school. So I have a good memory of that time. And I started with the Dialoghi Morales. And I was amazed because first I'd seen Latin like a beautiful language, but let's say just literature, remote to my own life. And when I first read Seneca, I found concepts, ideas that I could really feel I could apply in my everyday life. And that was the first time for me. So even if I don't agree of everything Seneca wrote, today we are going to read about suicide, and thanks God, we changed our mind throughout the centuries. But still, there are some passages where he really speaks to us, modern people, and I found it really, really wonderful and amazing to think that a person who wrote centuries ago can still talk to us and give us food for thoughts.
Yeah, I think we share a very similar path, but in different languages. I mean, I have a sentimental connection to Seneca as well, because he was kind of the first philosopher that I really dived into. And similar to you, as soon as I started reading, I started realizing, wow, this is really modern advice. It is amazing that he managed to grip on to certain principles. I mean, he had that Stoic background, and so I think that'll be what will be interesting about our conversation today, as well as bringing the Stoicism into it as well, with the Latin. But for me, it just seemed like he had gripped onto some universal truths that would carry across many generations. Yeah. And he even says that in the start of his letters, right? He says, I think it was in letter 4 or 5. He talks about how he was literally writing these letters for the future generations. He wanted it to be passed down to them. And there's something really beautiful about the fact that now so many people around the world are finding so much joy and fulfillment in reading his texts, and even in Latin, which is just even more beautiful. So I guess why don't we dive in? Before we do, I'm going to give me a second here. Okay. I'm going to take this thick book here and put it under my computer, because I feel like I'm looking down to you here. I don't want to do that. It's okay. That's a little bit better. Now we're kind of around that same level.
I need to take my notes because I have to have the text before me. Okay.
Cool. Well, I guess look, Irene, would you like to talk about why you chose this letter? And maybe give a bit of a summary from your perspective, and then I'll give a few thoughts, and maybe we can dive in and go back and forth, picking our favorite parts and going in Latin and English, and I'll read it and then you read it, and we'll do that.
So I chose it because I think it resumes many of the characteristics and tracks you can see in Seneca's writing. There are many examples, short stories, which is typical of Seneca and also typical of the Stoic and Cynic also tradition. There are many philosophical reflections on death and the value of life, which sum up the Seneca's talks about it. And also from the style perspective, I had something interesting to say. So yes, perhaps it's useful to first give an overview of the letter, because it's quite long, so we won't have the time to read the whole letter. Okay, so the letter opens with the view of a landscape. So Seneca is coming home from Egypt, where he has some financial affairs and properties. And he describes the arrival of the Naves Alexandrinae. So the letter opens with this image of the Naves, the ships that come from Alexandria, from Egypt. And these ships are recognizable by a particular, sail they have. And so all the people, all the companions, because they are near Naples in southern Italy. So all the companions get excited and go to the docks to see the ships arriving, while Seneca is in no hurry, and he's pigger, he's like lazy, and he doesn't want to rush to the docks. And so we already have this antithesis, this difference between Seneca, who is calm, also because he's old and he has become wiser, and the other people who rush up because they want to get the grain, because these ships would take the grain from Egypt. And Seneca would also have the interest to go and rush because he was expecting the letters from his friends and dependents who would say about his properties and how they were going. But he didn't care and he preferred to take it slowly. And so here we start seeing some of the thoughts of Seneca. Then there is quite a long digression about Tullius Marcellinus, who is a young man, a friend of Seneca and Lucilius, who suffers from a disease and is considering taking his own life. And so he listened to the advice of some friends. Some are too timid. Some others just want to please him. But there is one who, of course, is a Stoic man who gives him the best advice. So he says something like, "It's not important. Living is not an important matter. So we are all slaves in life, and what really counts is to die honorably and bravely." So he helps him to die. And here we already notice the first reflection about death and suicide. And of course, the Stoics would, but you can talk about this better than me, I think. For the Stoics, suicide was not only something a Stoic man could do, but also something he must do under certain conditions. And so we have to think it and view it in this perspective. Suicide wasn't something forbidden, let's say, but it was encouraged. And the search for a non-honorable and brave death was, for the Stoics, especially a sign of having lived a good and honorable life. And here I just put in a quick Latin note, because in Latin, honorable is honestus, vita honesta, honorable life. And I think that here in the translation, some nuances are lost, because honestus in Latin is tied with onus. Onus honoris is the honor, but honor and dignitas were like the main values in the Roman life at the time, and even more in the philosophical view of the Stoics. So it was really something important for a man to keep their life honesta. And it's not the honesty, because nowadays the word that comes from honestus is onesto, in Italian, honest, which means frank, but it's not totally the same in Latin. So that's it. Then, after this digression, we have some philosophical consideration about the death and the fact that there are fixated and unavoidable laws that makes that we have to die. So it's no wonder that we have to die, but some people approach to death fearing, trembling, while we should know that death is the final point of our life and we must be prepared. Something that Seneca writes anywhere in the Epistulae Morales. And then there is this example of the Spartan boy, if you want to talk maybe about it.
Yeah, well, firstly, let me comment on a couple of things you said. You're doing an amazing recount of this letter. I was not expecting that much detail, and you did it. This is great. You've made my job easy here. But one thing I would add is on the suicide front, I don't necessarily know that the Stoics encouraged suicide as much as they recognized that it wasn't an evil, right? Recognizing that death is not the bad thing. What is bad is if you don't live an honorable life. You know, if you are not an honorable person, and if you kind of cling to life as if you think that it belongs to you. But to live in agreement with nature means, in part, you know, which was their highest aim, to look around you and recognize the conditions of life that we're in, and he even talks about it in here, which I love it when he discusses this, that really this is a part of life. We're all going towards this end. Think about all the people who came before you, all the people that are going to come after you.
Yeah.
Think about the wake that you're in, where it's just pulling you into this infinite churn of life and death. It's just a matter of life, and well, it's the facts of nature. And so for the Stoics, it was not an encouragement of suicide. It was a recognition that if you came to a point where it was either you're going to be clinging to life like a child, or you have to betray your better instincts, or you have to betray your honorability, or your character, then it would be, by definition, the better choice that you should go out like that. And maybe that's where we'll discuss this. He gives this example here. This is one of my favorite stories that he tells. He tells it towards the end of the letter, where he's discussing how there's this Spartan slave who was taken as a slave, and he kept on yelling out in his native tongue, "I will not be a slave." And then the first task that was given to him, he basically said, "No, I'm not doing this," and he ran against the wall and committed suicide by cracking his skull. And the idea that he says this, he says, is anyone really a slave? With this story, is anybody really a slave? If you know that you can choose to not be a slave, because you always have the ability to leave right now. And it's a dark idea, but there's a deep philosophical idea there that needs to be discussed, outside of the normal modern emotional reaction, as I'm sure you would agree. But then, from there, I'm not going to do a good job of summing up, but I think he basically just goes through and gives. I've highlighted everything here, so I'm just looking at everything being highlighted. But he sums up his points and really just discusses with us that ultimately, why are you clinging to life so much when that's not the most important thing? He brings in that beautiful quote where he says that life is like a play. It's not the length that matters, but the excellence of the acting. Which is one that we all know. So that, I think, just is beautiful, that way of looking at life. But where would you like to start? I know we want to kind of pick apart a few key passages here.
I've highlighted, wait a moment. There was a passage where there was the comparison between life and a journey. So yes, there was the play one, but also there is the feast and the banquet one. So life is and death is like a feast. And there is also this one with a journey. And I think that it is at 4. So maybe I can just read a short sentence in Latin and comment on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And before you do, actually, can I just comment on one thing that you said earlier that I remembered? I really appreciate that you're bringing into this conversation that Seneca is quite a storyteller as well. And was that kind of a new way of approaching philosophy? Do you see it as?
Yes, I would say that. Yes, it really comes from the Stoic tradition, because you know better than me about the Stoics. So correct me if I say something.
Perhaps not. We'll see.
Right. But so Greek philosophers in general, but the Stoics especially, would talk in images, like just the Christians and Jesus taught in parables. So that's a way to really get to the heart of the people, even common people. So images are really a vivid way to describe even difficult things and make them visible and easy to grasp. And yes, I would say that in the Latin literature, Seneca was the first one to adopt this conversational style, because with Cicero, philosophy would be like a pamphlet, a treatise. With Seneca, there are letters. And this is a completely new form and format to put to discuss philosophical themes. Seneca is talking to his friend. Then we know that these are not real letters, and sometimes we can see that they are conceived for being published, but still we see that conversational tone that it's so modern too, I think.
Yeah, it certainly is. And one thing that I would add is that I think that when we read these texts, I've certainly fallen prey to that mindset of constantly looking for the nugget of wisdom and missing the forest for the trees, right? And I think that one of my Patreon members and longtime listener of the show, he actually reminded me one day, because I kind of skipped over a few passages, and he kind of said, when we were reading it, and he said, hang on, he was setting you up to try and understand the idea on a deeper level in those passages that you just skipped over. But I was looking for the quotes. Whereas, if you read the whole thing and if you actually go to the places that he's telling you to go in these stories, you get so much more out of it. And I've certainly only really just started paying attention to that sort of stuff. Because there's always a point to the places that he takes you. Wouldn't you say?
Really multi-layered. You can just read it like it is a letter, or you can dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's a never-ending process. You can always dig deeper and understand better.
And on that note, I mean, I was even thinking, I thought it'd be stupid even to mention this, but that in the first couple of verses, he makes the point to even point out that on these boats that are coming in, there's a difference between like the top sails and the bottom sails. Like the bottom sails aren't the ones that give the boat as much speed because the wind is is weaker towards towards the water. I'm not even speaking properly now. But the top sail is the one that gives it the speed because the wind is faster up there or something like that. And I was wondering, why would he say that? Because there's always times when Seneca gives a little metaphor and you think, oh, he's actually talking about life, and I was wondering what that, whether he was even likening that to life and death and stuff like that. But
yes, for me, he is also, because this metaphor of life, like sailing, is really also the Epicurean, but also Lucretius and Horace would talk about this, navigating the sea of life. So I definitely think it is there for a reason. And yes, you're right. There is always something that Seneca.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, you had a quote that you wanted to chuck in, so let's dive in with that. Which one are we reading here? Was it
paragraph 4?
Okay.
So iter imperfectum erit, si media parte aut citra petitum locum steteris. Vita non est imperfecta, si honesta est. Ubicunque desines, si bene desines, tota est. Do you want to read it in English first?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you mind if I read 3 through to 4?
No, of course.
Just because I think it sets it up really nicely. And then I'll let you dive in with what you take away from that. So it says, while everybody was and now we're at the dock. So while everybody was bustling around and hurrying to the waterfront, I felt great pleasure in my laziness, because although I was soon to receive letters from my friends, I was in no hurry to know my affairs were progressing abroad, or what news the letters were bringing. For some time now, I have had no losses nor gains either. Even if I were not an old man, I could not have helped feeling pleasure at this. But as it is, my pleasure was far greater. For however small my possessions might be, I should still have left over more traveling money than the journey to travel. I love that. Especially since this journey upon which we have set out is one which need not be followed to the end. So there he's bringing in the suicide aspect. An expedition will be incomplete if one stops halfway or anywhere on this side of one's destination. But life is not complete if it is sorry, not, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at reading out loud. Life is not incomplete if it is not, sorry, if it is honorable. At whatever point you leave off living, provided you have, provided you leave off nobly, your life is a whole. Often, however, one must leave off bravely, and our reasons therefore need not be momentous, for neither are the reasons momentous which hold us here. I love that last part where he's discussing this idea that your reasons for leaving life need not be showy or momentous, because really and this, he discusses this so much in the later letter.
Yes.
What are you here for?
And you have to think that Seneca, while he was writing these letters, was quite old. So we really see the reflections of an old, wiser man who looks back at his life. Yes. So I will also add another passage in Latin because it's beautiful. It's the one you told you liked. So, quantulumcunque aberem, tamen plus iam mi superesset viatici quam viae, praesertim cum eam viam simus ingressi quam peragere non est necesse. So here we have the comparison, the simile between the life and a journey. And he says, even if I have only a little, I have more money for the journey than the journey itself is going to be long. And in Latin, it is viaticum, which is the via. Via is the way, the journey, and the path. And the viaticum is etymologically the money, but also the food and all the necessary things you need for the journey. So there is also, yes, one thing that we might miss when we read in translation are all of these figures of speech that were really important for Latin writers, and it's not always easy to render them into a translation. And also the fact that if we read the same passage in Latin, it's so much more concise and short, while the translation needs to add many words, because Latin has this ability to say many things in just a few words, and Seneca in particular is an artist in this, in saying, expressing rich ideas in just a few words. So that's something that it's really beautiful to read in Latin.
Yeah, and, well, I mean, it just sounds amazing in Latin. It sounds way better than English, his letters.
Even if his translation is beautiful, I think. But yes, you really need to add words, because viaticum, we don't have a word in English nor in Italian to say the money that you need for the journey. We have to use a periphrasis, and we lost something. And then at 4, iter imperfectum erit si in media parte aut citra petitum locum steteris. So a journey is not complete, I think you read, if you quit in the middle of it or before the place you want to get to. But life is not incomplete. And here, complete and incomplete in Latin are perfectus et imperfectus. Ergo, iter imperfectum erit, he says, the journey will be not complete, but imperfectum has also, of course, the sense of perfection. So our word perfections comes from perfectus, which means whole, complete. And imperfectum, of course, is the contrary. And we also have the verb tense we call imperfectum et perfectum in Latin. And so we have this sense of wholeness.
And I just love that idea, right? That this idea that he's getting us, he's pulling us away from this standard view that we have of life, of we need to grasp onto as much time as possible. Yes. And to the Stoics, time, the time that you have here is completely indifferent. It doesn't mean anything, because ultimately you can live a very long life, but a very terrible life. And you can also live a very, very short life, but a very, very good and full and rich life. And that's what was important to them. And so that's why he's saying here that it doesn't matter where you leave. What matters is how you leave, essentially, right?
Yes. and also ubicunque desines, si bene desines, tota est, vita tota est. So wherever you stop it, if you stop it well, your life is complete. And here we have tota. In Latin, we have plenty of ways to express the idea of many. So we have omnis, cunctus, universus. But here he decided to use totus, who looks at something as a whole again. So vita est tota, is complete, perfecta, we could say. And yes.
A wholeness, a richness of life, right? Like a complete. I love that. And which word did you say that was, and what is it translated to in English? It's translated to whole in English, right?
Tota. Tota ubicunque desine, so wherever you stop, something like that.
Yeah.
If you stop in a good way, life is complete. I don't know how the translation translates.
Yeah, of one's destination, but life is not incomplete if it is honorable.
I think it's the sentence after this one.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. At whatever point you're leaving off, provided you leave off nobly, your life is whole. That's it. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Completeness, wholeness. Yeah. What was the word again?
Tota. So tota is the feminine, vita tota. Totus would be the masculine.
Okay. It's beautiful. I love it. Yeah. So where would you like to move to now? We've gone through verse 3 and 4. What are some other parts that really stand out to you as important for this letter?
Maybe we can go to the last part, or near to the last, where Seneca reflects on the fact that we are attached to the pleasures of life, and this prevents us from being able to stop and to die.
Yeah, absolutely.
But maybe before there is another one. Yes, if you go to paragraph 12,
yep,
he talks about the fixity and the eternity of the natural laws, let's say. And there is also this idea of necessitas, what is necessary. And I think that this is important for the Stoics. This idea of something that is bound to happen, and has always been decided from the eternity.
Yeah, of course, the Stoic idea that, living in agreement with nature, as we talked about earlier, it's definitely part of that means just stopping for a second and looking around you and realizing what are the natural laws that govern our lives. There's nothing more natural than death to the Stoics, right? Because everything will die. Would you like me to read out verse 12 perhaps, and then I'll get you to do it in Latin, and then we can pick it apart?
Yes.
So he says, you have been cast upon this point of time. If you would make it longer, how much longer shall you make it? Why weep? Why pray? You are taking pains to no purpose. And then he gives this element of poetry here. Give over thinking that your prayers can bend divine decrees from their predestined end. These decrees are unalterable and fixed. They are governed by a mighty and everlasting compulsion. Oh, I love that. I'd love to know what the translation of compulsion is.
That's necessity, the word I was referring about.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Your goal will be the goal of all things. What is there strange in this to you? You were born to be subject to this law. This fate befell your father, your mother, your ancestors, all who came before you, and it will befall all who shall come after you. A sequence which cannot be broken or altered by any power binds all things together and draws all things in its course. The only thing that I would want to just add there is one part that really stuck out to me was drawing things all in its course, because, I've had the sense that the way that the Stoics looked at life and fate in particular was that it's almost as if you're being kind of churned up in the wake of a speedboat. There's something moving. It's nature. Everything is just constantly in motion, constantly changing, like Heraclitus said. and you're just in the wake of this constant change, and you're going to like be dropped in there, and then you're going to get churned up a bit, and then you're going to go under. And that's how it is, right? And that's exactly how nature looks. If you stand back, it's just everything is constantly in this cycle of life, death, kind of like the Buddhists would talk about how everything is just eating and churning over. It's a really interesting way to look at it. And I just think that this idea of drawing things in its course, it really helps you to see fate in that light. What is your understanding of that principle of fate that they discuss? I don't know if
Yes, while reading, I was thinking about another quote from Seneca. I think it's also from the Epistola Morales, where he says something like "Fata volentem ducunt, nolentem traunt." So the destiny, fata, they accompany those who want to go, and they draw those who don't want. So there is this
another
comparison.
quote.
We can decide to resist or to follow the flow. So I think that there is something similar here, and there is also this idea of drawing and this chain of events, and also this chain that is pulling in one direction. And yes, that's it. But maybe you want to add something more.
Well, one thing that I did want to add is I've always found it very interesting that Seneca just drops quotes from his favorite poets or people like that. But I haven't paid much attention to who his, kind of poetic influences are. Was this also kind of a new style of teaching things as well, bringing in the kind of artists to teach us things as well?
I would say that this is quite typical of the Roman writers. So very often we see this interconnection between authors, and also from the Greek to the Romans. But I think that Seneca, in fact, does it particularly. So here again, of course, sometimes the quotes are quite out of context, but they are put into another context so that they make sense. In this case, it is quite fitting because this verse you have just read comes from Virgil, from the Aeneid. And I think that the Sibyl, the Cuman Sibyl, the Sibyl, yes, says this word to Palinurus, who is one of the sailors who hasn't been buried yet, and so he cannot enter the world of the dead, but he wants to. So the Sibyl says, you can't change what has been decided from the eternity. This is a nature law, so you must accept it. And yes, that's it for the quotes. It's quite frequent in Roman literature to see other authors quoted either literally or just without saying that you're quoting. But it was normal. It was, I would say that there wasn't the concept of copyright. They were just, it was just normal to draw inspiration from others.
Well, I actually think that that's something that they got right. I think that one thing that they got really right was, Seneca. What I think he says something like, the sentiment that he gives often is that truth is truth and it belongs to everybody. Wisdom is wisdom and it belongs to everybody. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care who says it. I'm interested in foraging for wisdom, and when I find it, I will use it and I will share it. And I think that that's a beautiful spirit that he has about him. That he's just looking for wisdom wherever he finds it, and when he comes across it, he's going to use it. And I think that more than anything has helped me to think about how it's very easy. I'll go on a Stoic tangent here. It's very easy, and I saw that I did this a lot when I started the podcast. It's very easy to be the Stoic person and to fall in line with the dogma of Stoicism, and to believe that is what philosophy is going to be about. But Seneca really shows us so many times by quoting a lot of Epicurus and Heraclitus and other people, he shows us that you're not a Stoic, you're a person who is seeking wisdom. And if somebody else can convince you that something that you believe in the Stoic school is incorrect, then your duty as a seeker of wisdom or a philosopher is to actually change the way you think and go where the wisdom is, and no matter where it takes you. And so when I've been doing my Seneca series, I've been trying to not necessarily be looking at it always through the lens of Stoicism, but just through Senecanism, you might say, like what is Seneca's philosophy specifically? I don't know. Was there anything that you wanted to add on those thoughts?
No, I agree. And I would add that also this eclecticism, this will to get many things agreed together. It's also quite typical, I think, of the Roman mind, because also Cicero followed many philosophical schools throughout his life, but I would say that he didn't see it like much of a contradiction. We can just take the best out of many things and make them work for the wisdom we want to seek, as you said.
So you think this is you're saying that this is quite typical of the Roman writers, that they not so much ideological, but were just simply seeking the best wisdom wherever they could find it.
Yes, I would say that for at least many of them, this is true. But also here, I think that Seneca does this particularly well, and he's very open-minded and also accept various yes. Ideas.
I'm interested in as well how that kind of mindset around philosophy led to something like, say, Catholicism, because I mean I know that Catholic doesn't the word Catholic mean universal, things that are in common among all, and I know that Seneca has I can't remember the specific quote, but he does talk about, when you're seeking wisdom, you want to be seeking things that are common among all things. You want to be seeking universal truths, the deepest truths that you can find that are common everywhere. And so, yeah, have you spent much time looking at the history of Catholicism, how it flourished out of the Latin kind of culture and everything like that?
Actually, no, I'm not an expert in this, but now that you're speaking, you reminded me about the fact that there is an epistolary among Seneca and St. Paul, with attributed to Seneca, but of course it's not really his. But that's interesting, because I guess that the author who I've never read this work, but I guess that the idea is to bring together paganism and Catholicism in some way, or at least find some points of contact. And so perhaps also Catholics and Christians in the beginning were more open to this mixing of things, and actually Christianism and the Hebrew word, let's say, mixed together to bring out the Catholicism and all the other branches of Christianism. So I would say, but this is just an opinion, that the dogmas and the dogmatism we see now sometimes is more recent, is due to the interpretation that the church gave to religion in more modern times, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that some early church fathers wrote about Seneca as our Seneca, like they can put him on a pedestal there. You've opened up a can of worms now, because this is one of my favorite subjects. I'm one of those people who has that secret desire that the conspiracy theory is true, that Seneca had some role in starting the Christian church, because I mean, there are a lot of connections there. Even what is it? I think James Rom, the one who wrote Dying Every Day, a history of Seneca, he even mentions that there's a lot of speculation over whether Paul may have actually had conversations with Seneca when he visited Rome, which is wild to think about, just to think about St. Paul the Apostle, one of the most influential people of all time, meeting with Seneca and having conversations. What would they have talked about? And yeah, I'm definitely, and Seneca was a playwright, and he wrote the sorts of plays. An interesting connection that I found was, he wrote the sorts of plays that were supposed to be read, not necessarily in the theater, but just read amongst friends, just reading around. And I was speaking to Brian Murescu. I just wanted to make sure I got his name right. Brian Murescu. I don't know if you've spoken to him yet.
No.
Amazing person who spent 10 years researching kind of the psychedelic origins of our culture, went into the Vatican vaults, things like that, expert in Latin and archaic languages. And he said that oh no, now I've forgotten the link that I was going to talk about. He was basically talking about how, oh crap, no, I've forgotten it. No, I'll have to come back to it. I need to just forget about this, and I'll remember it later and I'll bring it back. But the point is, I find very interesting connections with, Seneca and the early church. It's just fascinating stepping back and thinking what happened,
Yes.
But that's my conspiracy theory anyway, and I'll leave that as a conspiracy theory.
I just want to add that sometimes I think that these theories go a little bit too far. Or maybe about Seneca and St. Paul there is something true, but for instance, some medieval scholar, let's say that in medieval times, many would say that Virgil, in one of his eclogies, foretold the birth of Christ, and so they also said that Seneca was a prophet, and the seal would have revealed him the secrets of Christianism. So, yes, but
who knows? I think what I was going to get at earlier with Brian Moresco is that he was talking to me about how a lot of the early Christian stories were meant to be read in close circles, almost like similar to what Seneca's plays were supposed to be, in that. And it's just, it's interesting to think about that sort of stuff because, who knows how all of that sort of stuff develops and how it grows. And anyway, we've gone on a massive tangent here. I'm very sorry. I go on that all the time. I was wondering, could I read verses 14 and 15, and then maybe I would love to hear you read that out in Latin if you would consider it, because that's my favorite story, and maybe we could discuss that, and I think if there's any other passages that you want to dive into, we can do that as well. But so he says here, here we go. The story of the Spartan lad has been preserved. Taken captive while still a stripling, he kept crying in his Doric dialect, "I will not be a slave." And he made good of his word. For the very first time, he was ordered to perform a menial and degrading service, and the command was to fetch a chamber pot. He dashed out his brains against the wall. So near at hand is freedom, and is anyone still a slave? Would you not rather that your own son die thus than reach old age by weakly yielding? Why, therefore, are you distressed, when even a boy can die so bravely? Suppose that you refuse to follow him. You will be led. Oh, I love that. Take into your own control that which is now under the control of another. Will you not borrow that boy's courage and say, "I am no slave"? Unhappy fellow, you are a slave to men. You are a slave to your business. You are a slave to your life. For life, if courage to die be lacking, is slavery. Man, there's so much in that, right? I mean, like, just showing us that, and I think that's one of the things that really influenced me in my early readings of Seneca's writings, is that line that he says there, like, you're a slave to a business, you're a slave to your life. He talks about it more in other parts of the letter. You can think about all the things that we're a slave to in life, and you can think, okay, this tells us what the freedom is that the Stoics were searching for. They're searching for a freedom from that slavery to things, where you take life on your own hands and into your own control. Yeah, I'd like, if you would like to read some of that, and then maybe give you your thoughts as well.
Yes, I'm going to read those same paragraphs in Latin and then comment on them.
Wonderful.
Exempla nunc magnorum virorum, metibis iudicam relaturum, puerorum referam. Lacun ille memoriae traditur, in pubis aduc, qui captus clamabat non serviam sua illa dorica lingua, et verbis fidem imposuit. Ut primum iussus est fungi servili et contumedioso ministerio, ad ferre enim vas obscenum iubebatur, in lisum parieti caput rupit. Tam prope libertas est, et servit aliquis. Ita non sic perire filium tuum malles, quam per inertiam senem fieri. Quid ergo est cur perturberis, si mori fortiter etiam puerile est. Puta nolle te sequi, duceris, fac tui iuris quod alieni est. Okay, so you went on, but I think that part in Latin.
I have to tell you, I was as you were reading that out, I was reading the text. Oh, not reading the text, but I was looking at the text as if I was following along anything that you were saying. And then I realized, what are you doing? You're not following along, but it's amazing. Yeah, it's such a beautiful language. But go on.
Yes, the first thing that I noticed when I first read this passage is that it's okay, in Roman literature, it's really common to quote and to talk about the examples of some famous men of the past, about her deaths or her deeds. And here there is like, let's say that Seneca is turning this use the other way around, because he is the one to say, exempla magnorum virorum metibi judicas relaturum puerorum referam. So it was common to quote exempla magnorum virorum, so of important men, but he's going to tell one about a kid, and so that's quite strange. That it takes a common place in the Latin literature and turns it over.
See, this is an example of where I didn't even read that part because I dived straight into the story, but that gives us something extra there, that he's choosing to use the story of a young boy, which actually gives the argument even more strength, right? Because you think, no, we're not talking about an adult here who's taking his own life. Like, this kid had more freedom than you. And I actually felt like the way that he talks about it, it's almost like that story of Diogenes where he goes down to the river and the boy comes next to him and drinks with his hands, and Diogenes has a cup and he throws it away because the boy is a better philosopher than he, right? This is the same moment, but for Seneca, where he's saying, look at this boy, look at how much freedom he has. Is anybody really a slave now? Like, look, you can have that kind of freedom. It's a dark kind of freedom, but it's freedom nonetheless, right? It's recognizing that you can take life into your own hands.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's it. So we can draw inspiration from kids too, and not only from it. It also gives the idea that in order to live according to philosophy, one doesn't need to be I don't know who. We just need to reflect. And
yes,
and I will focus on the part about the freedom. So tam prope libertas est, et servit aliquis. And I think that in this sentence we can see this shortness of Seneca. So literally, the freedom is so close, and still someone is a slave. But he told this with 7 words, I think. And here also we can observe that there is something about style that Seneca used very often with these rhetorical questions. Of course, he's writing letters, so he has to interact with the reader. And there is also this figure of speech that Seneca uses very frequently, not here, but later in the letter, which is the occupatio. It's called occupatio or ante-occupatio, which is the figure where he foretells and prevents the objections that someone can make to what he has wrote. So someone perhaps would say that, but, and also I think that he likes these the 2 points and then a question. Really, like epigrammatic is like a sentence where you have a big truth condensed, and you are required to think about it, because the questions make us think about ourselves. So, prope libertas est, et servit aliquis. Even if freedom is so close, there is still people who accept to serve. While a kid had the courage not to do it.
Yeah, well, you bring up a very interesting point, which is that he does often, he'll divert into asking questions and saying, well, you might say this or you might say that. And then he gives you the answer, which is, certainly a style that he uses almost in every letter, right? There's always a point where he asks a question that you might have. And you could definitely say that there are probably some questions that we might have that he would choose to leave out because it might be too difficult to answer. But certainly he's got all of these devices. What are some other devices that we might see that but we might kind of miss that you notice in his writings?
There is the use of not tenses but voices. I don't know how they're called in English, but you see the active or passive voice of a verb,
Okay.
There is just an example here after some words. Putat nolle te sequi, duceris. So think, if you wanted to follow the example of this kid, you will be drawn to it. So duceris, it is the passive voice, and I think that it really remarks the fact that we live, but we are not masters of our lives. At least if we don't become a master of our life. And also in the letter about time, the first one, he uses many passive forms because he wants to give the idea that time is ours, but we allow others to take it away from us, and so we have many passive verbs. And another thing is, yes, in the following sentence, factui iuris quod alieni est, that you liked. So make your own something that is not yours. Here we have Seneca draws from the language of the law. So alieni iuris esse means to be property of someone else, but it is almost a formula, juridical formula. So sometimes we see this mixing up of level of speech, this drawing from other fields of knowledge like law or I don't know, science somewhere. And that's something that we don't always get to notice while reading in translation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it must just be completely different. Obviously, reading this in Latin versus reading it in English. Is there anything that you? Well, maybe this is a question for the end of the interview because I wanted to dive into maybe one more quote if you have time. But I'll ask it now anyway. Is there anything? Is there anything that you think that people should do if they're reading the English translation, but you feel? Are there any tips that you could give them that will allow them to? Well, I mean, probably on top of all of the tips that you've been giving us so far, that allow them to really get the. What am I trying to say here? I know that there's trying to. Obviously, there's all these ways that he will be using the Latin language in the specific way that it is supposed to be used in order to get his message across. A lot of that might be lost in translation. Is there any way that you could tell people who are reading this in English to be able to find that without learning the language, say? Are there any tips that you would give them to things to focus on?
Okay, the first advice would be to select a good translation, because there are some translations that manage to render some of the tracks and of the aspects of the original language. So, for instance, not only in Seneca, but in all the Latin literature, more or less, there is this tool of the repetition. So keeping on repeating the same words, or just with little variation. And translations, on the other hand, tend to avoid this, because to us, I don't know, in Italy at school, they always teach us not to use the same word again and again. But for the Romans, that was not only allowed, it was research, it was something searched for and beautiful. And so maybe you can notice if in the translation there are some words that recur many times, and maybe in the translation they are not the same, but if you have the Latin version on the other side, you can try and see if you can say the same word repeated over and over again.
Okay.
Or another thing in Seneca that I thought about is the shortness of the sentences. So you can have a look at the Latin text and you will see that the sentences are very short. And okay, we have to know that punctuation in Roman text is not Roman. It's more recent, because Romans wouldn't, and the scribes wouldn't use punctuation, but still, if the editors decided to punctuate that way, it means that they think that the sentences need pauses in those places. So we can rely on it if the editor has done a good work. And so you can just have a look at the Latin version and see how short sentences are, how many questions you have, and maybe the translation decide to treat some questions like they are not questions, because sometimes it becomes heavy to read if you have too many questions. Because translation, commercial translation, of course, try to make the text readable and enjoyable for our sensitivity of language. Because if they would do a literal translation, it would be awful to read, but it would give us a sense of how the actual Latin version works. And another advice is if you can listen to the text read in Latin, because maybe you already noticed that there is a musicality, and you also notice repetition and pauses. So okay, that's
musicality
why
certainly, yeah, it flows so beautifully, the language. And I've got these Loeb versions of his natural questions and his plays, and now I'm certainly going to go through and I'm going to be paying attention to the left hand side here and see what I can notice about it. I'm fascinated by the lack of punctuation, though, in the Latin language. How does that work? How do they differentiate between this? This might be a complete tangent, but how do they differentiate between questions and stuff like that?
Okay. Of course, about the written language, because in oral languages they did have pauses. I don't know, but we are quite sure that they had. But in the written, in writing, no. But we have to think that writing was very different and very elitarian. So not everybody could write. Not even some Roman writers. They had their servants who were there to write, to take notes. And then the fact is that paper, let's say the ancestor of paper, was very costly, and so they had to to use all the space they had. And simply punctuation up to a certain point hadn't been invented yet. So at first they would just write and the words were not separated. So everything in the beginning was written like a continuous series of letters. And of course, this requires many skills to read the text itself, because one must know how to separate one word from another. And so that was the beginning. If we see ancient inscriptions in stone, we see that we have a series of letters without separation. Then someone decided to separate words, but still punctuations wasn't there. There has been an evolution. At a certain point, they would use like a single point for any kind of punctuation. And then, but only later, I think that that's in the Renaissance that they really invented a way to differentiate, and they invented the question mark, for instance. And so all we see in our modern edition are interpretations. So the editor decides that it makes sense to punctuate there, but it's not Seneca's choice. And Seneca probably didn't even think about the punctuation, because he was dictating to a slave who was writing.
Wow, that is amazing. Can you read when it's all just one large piece? Like, are you fluent in being able to translate that?
I am quite fluent in reading medieval and Renaissance text, so where the separation between words was somehow there. I think that I could read, I could separate words, but it requires time, because sometimes words make sense even if you separate them in another way, especially in Latin, when you have all these endings who looks like the same. So it takes time and effort, but fortunately they found out that they could separate words quite a long time ago. So
yeah, man, that is amazing. I love it. It's so foreign to me, these ideas, but they're amazing. Well, I want to give you a chance to, maybe if there's one more quote that you think you'd like to read and discuss, what would it be?
Wait, because there is the final one about the play, which is beautiful, but I think that yes, in paragraph 19.
Yep.
Perhaps you could read the whole paragraph.
Sure. Here we go. Here we go. He's asking the questions again. But, says one, I wish to live, for I am engaged in many honorable pursuits. I am loth to leave life's duties, which I am fulfilling with loyalty and zeal. Surely you are aware that dying is also one of life's duties. You are deserting no duty, for there is no definite number established which you are bound to complete.
Yes. When I read this, it struck me quite a bit, because it's really something I didn't think about, but it's true. No one tells us that we have to get to a certain point of life to say that we have been successful. I don't know. And the same is true for our plannings. So if you don't have, I don't know, a boss telling you what to do, how do you know that you have achieved what you did, what you wanted to do that day? That's arbitrary. You decide, but you could have decided another way. So, and in fact, if you die that day, that's the end, and you can complete your to-do list for the day.
Yeah. So. and also there's just this idea that one of life's duties is to die. It's like the biggest one. It's like the one that every single person, no matter who they are or where they lived, they have to do it. And if you consider yourself beholden to these higher realms of understanding like nature, then that it's just a part of life, and you should be able to reconcile yourself to that. But yeah, would you like to read that in Latin?
Yes, I will. So there is the occupatio I was talking about, so the preventing of the objections. Sed ego inquit vivere volo, qui multa honeste facio. invitus relinquo officia vitae, quibus fideliter et industriae fungor, quid tu nescis unum esse ex vitae officis et mori, nullum officium relinquis, non enim certus numerus quem debias explere finitur. So here again we have short sentences, which I think also are used to give us a sense of suffocation, because we have these recurring sentences and questions. And so, quid tu nescis unum esse ex vitae officis et mori. So you don't know that to die is one among the duties of life. So officium in Latin is really a duty, and that's the word from which comes our office. For us, office is the place where we work. For them, it was the work itself. And so nullum officium relinquis, you're not leaving any duty, because there is not a decided number of tasks that you have to bring to completion. And here again, certus, a certain number, but certus in Latin, in my opinion, has a deeper sense. It's more powerful because certus comes from the verb cernere, which means to decide. So certus means something that has been decided. And also finitur, finire, to define a certain number. Et finire refers to the fines. Fines would be also the borders of a country, but also the line which delimitates something. So finitur, it means that again there is the idea of completeness, wholeness. So we don't know how many years we have to live. We don't know how many tasks we need to complete, because no one cared about deciding this number. There is not a number we should aim to.
Well, you mentioned that the word that made kind of the border of the country. Is he using that word to refer to the end of your life? Is that the ending point?
Also because finis, so the end, also means death, but here he's using it about a defined number. So here it means to define, but also to end, to bring to an end. It's the same root, in fact.
Yeah, man. I would love to do this with another letter sometime. And what I'd particularly like, maybe we could set up a conversation at a later date. I'm not sure. Have you read through his natural questions?
No, I've just read some excerpts, but no, I don't know that work well. But I can read it.
There's the first letter of Natural Questions is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever read from Seneca, and I can't believe that it's taken me so long to get to us. But I'd love to one day have a conversation with you where I actually have the Latin with me so that I can follow along while you're reading as well. Because it's absolutely wonderful.
And we can do like a Latin English interview.
yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, Irene, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I want to keep this going. Have more conversations in the future as well. I really want people to check out your channel, and for anybody listening, who's interested in learning Latin as well, I couldn't think of a better person to recommend. And tell me, so you've recorded yourself reading this entire letter in Latin. Yes. So I'm going to include the links in the show notes where people can find that. I think that is so cool. And you're doing that with other letters from Seneca as well, right?
In fact, no, I prepared a free course which ended last May, where I read the first letter. And on my channel, there are some videos related to Seneca. but I prepared a list of all the contents I've ever made about Seneca. So if they download the audio recording, they also get this list. And I think I will do more about this later. And of course,
Awesome.
if there is the occasion to collaborate further, I would love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Irene, I would really, really love that. And you've inspired me to really, I love this language, and I love the sound of it. It appeals to me because of its musicality as well. Hearing you speak in this language, you can get a real sense for the melody that exists there, and it's so beautiful. And I mean, let's have more conversations down the line. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, and I wait for you being able to convert in Latin someday.
Yes, I'm not going to hold myself to it yet, but there will come a time where I'm sure I will consider that it will be a priority. But yeah, I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise.
The same for you. Thank you.
Hey there, YouTubers. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this episode and you'd like many more just like it, then you can head to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. There you'll get access to exclusive episodes that haven't been released yet, as well as many other benefits. Also, if you'd like to work one-on-one with me in my coaching practice, then you can head to simonjedrew.com/coaching. Talk to you soon.